So I was talking with Frederick, and Frederick's a digital marketing, advocacy marketing expert, and we were talking about digital marketing and how we felt even the good campaigns were quite mistargeted and misdirected. And we came up with an analogy. So you're back in Piccadilly Circus, and that busker's still there, and he's still playing that Neil Young song, and you like it, and you stay, you listen to it, it's good. You put £2 in the guitar case. And then a friend tells you about another busker playing Prince songs in Covent Garden. You go out of your way to listen. And she's really good, and you stay for 20 minutes. And as you leave, you put a £5 in the hat. But then imagine you're back home, and there's a knock on your door, and it's a third busker. And they say, "Hello, I've studied your social media profile, and I think you'd like my songs. So can I come in and play you some songs?" Now, that's intrusive, and it's really irritating. You close the door, no money. That's how a lot of digital marketing behaves. And let me give you a personal example. For some reason, because of my social profile, I get a lot of car advertising targeted at me. When I go on digital, people are always trying to sell me cars. Anyone who knows anything about me and the cars that I drive will understand this is really badly targeted. It's not just that it's badly targeted, it's very irritating. If I see a car ad on television, it's fine, it doesn't bother me. It's just there. If I'm reading a magazine, there's a car ad, it's just part of what's there. But when I'm on my computer and they're talking at me about these things I'm not interested in, it feels much more intrusive and it's much more irritating. And it gives me an actual negative impact on the brand that's advertising me because they're getting it wrong in my space. So, but does that mean that digital marketing should be ignored? Of course not. It's very important. And it's very powerful. So how can we make digital marketing more effective? And particularly in the world of recommendations, word-of-mouth recommendation. I was talking to someone backstage earlier and just mentioned I was talking about word-of-mouth recommendation. They said, still the most powerful recommendation. I think we all know that's true. And social media's changed everything with that, because at the click of a button, any of us can share our opinions and experience with loads and loads of people. And then critically, they might share those with other people again, creating the much spoken about viral effect. And that's very, very powerful economically, socially, politically. It can make presidents, it can tear down regimes, it can raise millions for charity. It can make a new brand or kill off an old brand, or change a television executive's decision on what to schedule on the channel. So it's a very powerful tool that can mean a lot of money for businesses, and they're prepared to spend a lot of money to try and harness it for their own benefit. So we set out to find out a bit more about word of mouth recommendation. How do they actually work in real life? So I run a segmentation and market research business, so inevitably the first thing we think about and do is use some research to generate data. So we collected a lot of data from people. We spoke to people at the receiving end of recommendations, and I'll come back to them later. But first, we spoke to people who made recommendations. So we'd asked people who'd made recommendations recently. And we asked them about what sort of recommendations they'd made, what category, who to, whether they were rewarded, why they made the recommendation, what channel they'd used, etc. And what emerged when we analysed all the data we'd collected was there were 8 distinct recommender types. Many of them are motivated by liking the product, liking the brand, or being asked in the first place. But 3 are motivated by reward. And one in particular, there's one segment motivated by cold, hard cash. They're 1 in 7 of recommenders, but they take £4 out of every 5 of the rewards for recommendations. So businesses that are doing the recommend a friend type promotions, they're taking £4 out of every 5. But is that valuable? Does it work? Is it effective? And what about the other recommenders who aren't motivated by reward? Is that any more or less effective? So next, we spoke to the people at the receiving end of the recommendation, the word of mouth recommendation, because bear in mind, as is common sense, a recommendation is only as effective as the impact it has on the person being recommended to. It doesn't mean anything if they don't do anything about it. But an effective recommendation is one that is taken up and then shared, and that's where the social media thing comes in. And we found there's 3 factors that really dominate how effective a recommendation is. One is timeliness. So if I'm recommending to you, are you in the market at that time for what I'm recommending? The second is credibility. Am I credible? Do I have any expertise in what I am recommending to you? And the third is the relationship. What relationship do we have that allows you to trust me or not in what I'm saying? Now, the timeliness thing is obvious. If you are in the market for something and I make a recommendation to you, of course you're going to be more receptive. But we found that a lot of people had taken up recommendations that they hadn't asked for, so unsolicited recommendations, in categories they weren't in the market for. Now, a lot of these are very high involvement categories like restaurants, music, films, entertainment, that kind of stuff. But for example, in insurance, hardly a high interest category, 1 in 10 people had taken an unsolicited recommendation and acted upon it. So we wanted to understand why that is. And just as a personal example, I could understand that up to a point. I've been a customer of First Direct Bank in the UK for about 2 or 3 decades, I think. And this is a bank. I don't know anything about banks. I don't care that much about banks. But yet I have recommended this particular bank to people, not just because they have a better savings rate or a better current account, but because of the relationship I have with them. And the way they treat me makes me want to recommend to people. So, what is it that can make an unsolicited recommendation more powerful? Well, it's not just about business, it's about human interaction, it's about human chemistry. If I am a credible source of information, of recommendation as I make it to one of you, and if we have a relationship that allows you to trust me, it's far, far more effective than any other sort of recommendation. So if we go back to our mercenaries, the people motivated purely by reward and cash, their recommendations generate the lowest consideration levels and are very unlikely to be shared on. So any viral effect is very unlikely. Whereas our credible recommenders are not only more likely to be taken up, it's more likely to be shared. So it's a lot more effective than the reward. So where does that leave us? Well, in my business, we're focusing very heavily on joining up data with real depth of human understanding, because if we can put those together, we stand a greater chance of finding those recommenders who are so powerful in their recommendation and have such a knock-on effect beyond the initial recommendation. So it's potentially a very powerful thing. But what about in the big wide world? Well, all of us in this room pretty much are going to be involved in making recommendations at some point. If you're applying for a job, you're effectively recommending that people take you. If you're in a meeting and there's an action plan you want to be implemented, well, you're making a recommendation there. Or if you're managing a business with thousands of customers or a brand with millions and millions of consumers, you are recommending to them that they do something that you want them to do. So it's quite a general point. So well-targeted recommendations from a credible source are going to have a lot more weight and power. And when you're making a recommendation, if you just step out of yourself rather than making a recommendation at people, and this side seems obvious, but certainly in most business contexts, but also personal contexts, if people make a recommendation at you, it's less effective than if they stand back and think, how do you seem to the person making the recommendation? How do they perceive you as a recommender? If you consider that, you're going to have much stronger chance of getting that job, persuading people to go to the cinema that you want them to go to, getting your recommendation through in a meeting, or developing convincing communications for millions and millions of consumers. A good example might be if you're a marketing person, say, and you have quite low credibility in finance and you want to make a financial recommendation, you've got to think quite hard about the way you're going to be perceived. If you want to have a financial recommendation be taken up, you've got to really think how you're going to be perceived as a marketing person when you're making it. If you put yourself in those shoes, your recommendations will be accepted and you will be taken at your word, which is what we want. Thank you all very much.